Hey, I'm so glad you decided to join this practical video guide. My name is Manny, also known as Dat Makes Tech on Twitter, and we are here to think about society when it comes to social media. We're here to make some connections to our personal life and come up with principles that will allow us to improve it. Okay? So, first of all, let's talk about how this will work. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not here to give you my own conclusions and force you to believe what I believe. I'm here to guide you in a thought process where we brainstorm, we do practical exercises and experiments, and combine that with my own story and framework that I've developed. And as a result, you'll have your own conclusions and principles to use every day. A little about me. So I'm originally from Latin America, but I've been in Florida, United States for almost 20 years or so. And I work as a software engineer, been doing that for a while, and even working from home before COVID. In the beginning, it was very, very difficult for me to stay on task, to really uh, do what it needed to do to thrive in that environment. And I had to, through some trial and error, figure out how this remote work thing um, could function in my life. Now I've got it pretty handled, and one of the reasons why I'm making this is because I know that it's a big problem for people who work remotely, but even in general, because of social media has now taken over every facet of our lives. So outside of work and any side projects I have going on, my main focus is being outdoors with my kids, with my wife, and enjoying the nice Florida weather. Before we go into the course itself, I'm going to pose you this question. And whenever you see this guy in the corner going like this, it means this is more of an interactive section. If you need to pause the video and think about it, I invite you to do so. We want to keep this calm atmosphere like the beach behind me. We want that to be the vibe of this presentation. So what would you do if you had an extra 10 hours a week? Pause the video, think about it. In the meantime, I'll tell you what I would do. So I always have books and audiobooks in my list, even shows that I never get to finish. Excuse me. And with this 10 hours a week, I should be able to catch up on those. Also, visiting family a little bit more, um, taking the kayak out to the nearby lake or nearby spring so that I can do what I love a little bit more. Okay. So put a pin on that and we'll revisit it later. This video guide is composed of 3 parts. The first video will have some discussions about social media and time. The second video will be giving you a context on the social media platforms, their business models, how the recommender systems work, and this will help you get clear on what you need to do to improve your experience. Okay, that will be the third video, where will be just a very practical step-by-step guide that by the end of this guide is complete, you'll have made some progress. So let's start with this first section. How do you feel social media makes your life better? There has to be some benefits because everyone's on it, right? Um, I'll tell you my own opinion. So from my own personal experience, it's the ability to hear and get knowledge from other people I wouldn't have otherwise been able to. So, podcasts, mentors, people that I feel are 1, 2, or 3 years ahead of me in terms of my career or even my personal life, professionals in different areas that maybe I may not meet in real life, right? Is that something that you also enjoy about social media? Something else that's more of a society thing is when these positive trends occur. We had this bucket challenge that was able to act as a crowdfunding mechanism to for this ALS disease, right? So they were able to fund more research on how to make it better, how to find a cure, et cetera, et cetera. And then there was another one, a smaller one that I remember. I can't remember the exact hashtag, but it was something like a trash cleanup challenge. And people would put a before and after bragging as to how much they actually cleaned up. So that is great. That is something that would not be possible without social media and its organic behavior. But we're all here because we know there are some negatives. So think about it. What are some negatives? Write it down or just keep it in your head. What are some things that you've noticed in your life or in other people's lives that are some negatives, you know? Pause the video if you need to. Otherwise, I'll tell you my own opinion on this. So when smartphones first came out, these kind of videos started coming out of people just being so distracted or so focused in something else, and as they're walking and they're, you know, falling over, losing their phones. This kind of stuff is still a problem today, and maybe even more so because of there's more social media platforms nowadays than when smartphones first came out. Um, One personal one for me is this need to be constantly aware of what's happening in the world, right? So that was a big issue around 2016 for me with student protests in Venezuela, my home country. I knew people that were there that were protesting. There were YouTubers on the field live streaming what was happening, and you didn't know. You were checking like every 10 minutes to see if something changed. Did they topple the government? Did they arrest the opposition leader? And then there's misinformation. You know, you would start in a website, you end up on YouTube, you end up on Twitter, where people are just hypothesizing. They don't really know what's going on. And unfortunately, this affected my my mood during the day, right? So not only would it affect my workday because I'm checking all these things instead of making progress on what I'm doing, and you can see here, I call this being an overinformed Joe, where you're just constantly checking throughout the day and you're just getting mad, getting angry, getting sad, getting angry. Then, you know, it's a mess. So I ended up having to really force myself to not constantly check the news. And nowadays, I'm more of an intentionally informed person where I only allow myself to read the news at a certain time of the day. I block a lot of those websites when I'm supposed to be working. And the other tip, if you fall into one of these categories, is I recommend some aggregator websites. So there's newsletters you can subscribe to that will give you a summary every week. One of them I found was called All Sides, where they show the perspective from one political party and the perspective from another political party. There's also still physical magazines like The Economist that you can subscribe to. And, you know, maybe you just force yourself to only read those news and not constantly be checking. I know during COVID, this was a really similar problem that a lot of people had because the anxiety of not knowing how dangerous it is or what's happening, you know, how is this affecting other people. So yeah, the other issue that I had with social media, and this is up until recently, is that I always wanted to work on side projects outside of my regular job. And one day I realized that I was spending around 15 hours listening to podcasts, on Twitter, looking at people making money, talking about things that they sell, things that they do, and listening to successful people on long form podcasts. But the time that I was spending creating or selling my own things was really less than an hour a week. And I was like, wait a minute, something's wrong here. This is like extreme procrastination, you know? In all reality, it should be flipped, you know? Like, what am I doing with all this information if I'm not really applying it or modeling it? So once I was able to reverse this trend, I finally began to release products. So this started last year, where now I have 2 courses. I have a web app that I released, and you know, it's great. Finally making progress. So I got out of that procrastination loop. Now, I could tell you step by step, hey, delete this, configure your phone to do that, use this service to block certain websites, but that's not going to help because we need to have a proper mindset about this. Let's come up with some principles, and I'll give you an example from history. In the US, we had a period of time called the Prohibition where alcohol became illegal. A bunch of people in our culture decided, hey, alcohol is evil. We need to stop drinking this thing. So they passed some laws, made it illegal. What happened? People would still, you know, people don't have unlimited willpowers. They're like, they would end up in speakeasies that were illegal, but they didn't care. They went over there, they had some drinks, and this even got involved with the mafia and whatnot. And this, when we take this metaphor to social media, it tells me that we probably is too late to eliminate social media from the world, right? It's everywhere. Kids use it. You need it to conduct business and transactions and keep up with people. So let's talk about using it properly, mindfully. right? Let's talk about using it in moderation. Just like you want to avoid binge drinking because of how it affects your life, you want to avoid binge consuming in social media, right? And then when you do consume, you want to be mindful about it. Maybe you tell yourself, hey, my personal rule is that I only have a glass of wine a week. Or my personal rule is that I only have a couple of beers every weekend. Now, what rules you choose for yourself, I'm not going to tell you. That's for you to determine. But these are the principles that we're going to focus on in this guide. Let's look at a regular day, right? This bar that goes from left to right divides your day into work, leisure time, and sleep. Okay? All these little black lines represent the amount of times we might pick up our phone and go and check our social media feeds, check our notifications. When it's spread out throughout the day, it's like, hey, it doesn't seem that costly. It doesn't seem like a big deal. But when you read statistics on the average time spent on these platforms, you'll see that in the US, it was around 2.5 hours a day. So if you were to compact all that into one sitting, now it looks more substantial, right? Like, look at how much of your free time is being spent on social media, right? So if you are someone that is really short on time, maybe this matters to you a lot. But when you're younger, maybe you have less responsibilities and it's not that big of a deal in the moment to you. I did see statistics that younger generations spend even more than 2.5 hours a day on this stuff. Now, let's think about this. If it's 2.5 hours a day on average, right? If we extrapolate that to a month, it actually equals to 3 days of your month. So pause here if you need to, but what would you do with 3 days out of the month, right? Most people, when they get 3 days off, it's a long weekend, they take that and they go on a trip. Obviously, you can't do that when the time is spread out throughout the day like this, but it's still 3 days worth of your life. So I personally would grab those 3 days and catch up on chores or, make some phone calls to people I care about, or maybe catch up on a show that I like, or, whatever it is that you want to do. I'm not here to tell you how to use your time, just exposing you to this reality, right? If we zoom out even more, we'll see that equals to 1 month and 5 days out of the year. Hey, that's even more substantial. That's enough to finish a book, to write a small book. Maybe you have some hobbies that you want to learn. Maybe you're starting to learn a new language, and 1 month's worth of training, you can pick up a new skill. And let's do one more zoom out, and we'll end it here. That means that on average, people are spending 1 year out of every 12 looking at these things. Now, whatever they're doing in there, is it good, is it bad? That's, for them to decide, but it's a huge chunk of your life. So I'm just here to expose this reality to you and ask you if you've ever seen this Justin Timberlake movie, In Time. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. Basically, it's this future dystopian world where everybody stops aging at 25, but you start to get a countdown on your arm that shows how many minutes, how many years you have left to live. And instead of transacting with money, they transact by exchanging this time. So rich people can technically live forever. And the reason I bring this up is because I would want to frame that time is inherently valuable in its own. They say time equals money, but I would say time by itself is extremely valuable. That's what I'd like to leave you with this section. See you in the next video.